All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I will ask Andrew to do the roll call to close the meeting.
Treasurer Diosa,
Here.
Gene Rondo.
Here.
Mark Carullo.
Here.
Mike Cicerone.
Here.
Joseph Codiga.
Here.
Matthew Howard.
Here.
Jan Lee.
Yeah.
William Murray.
Here.
Claire Newell.
Here.
Is not here. Alan Palazzo.
Here.
Sandra Paquette.
Here.
Dr. Shaw Hughes.
Here.
Michael Tu.
Here.
Jonathan Womack.
Here.
We have a fourth.
Thank you, Andrew. I will now seek the approval of the draft meeting minutes of November 2025 of the retirement board meeting. So moved. Second. Any comments or edits? Seeing none, all in favor, vote aye. Any nays? So moved. Thank you. We'll move on to the executive director's report.
Great, two very small items. One, the 26th board calendar for regular board meetings is inconvenient for all of you. It won't be published to Secretary of State for another week, but if you have thoughts or comments, please share them back with me. Two, a technology update. Justin Miller is actually sitting there in the back of the room. I'd like to say hello. Justin is the new Chief Information Security Officer for both Treasury and the retirement system. You know, this is something that this board asked for, so I wanted to call out that he started. He's doing a great job. In the new year, he'll probably be presenting this to us. And kind of like in addition to the short-term lives on today's agenda is that we're kind of slowly cleaning up the electronic board books. So he'll be reaching out to a few of you one at a time to make sure those are all like updated with the latest software and we're all manage that easily. So if you hear from him prior to a information security update, that would be why. Third, and most importantly, I would like to, I've now made you the presenter, Joe Newton. Our actuaries are here. They're here to present the annual actuarial evaluation. And so that will be the bulk of today's meeting. And I'll hand it over to you, Joe.
Oh, okay.
Welcome. Good morning.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's pretty cold compared to where I came from.
Yeah.
It's that very cold. Sometimes it's cold, it's okay, but that's all right. Yeah, so sharing, there we go. Excellent. So yes, we're gonna go through the summary of the evaluation results this morning. We've seen as a very positive outcome. Everything going very close to according to plan, and the policies are working as expected. We'll show you that. So what is this process? Again, it's just an annual snapshot or checkup. Well, you gather the data and analyze and recalculate the liabilities, gather up the asset information, and remeasure the trends, and make some recommendations about what's happening or let the policies work as they're supposed to work. This valuation sets the contribution rate for fiscal 2028. 26 and 27 have already been set. So there is this 2-year delay between this valuation result and when it actually becomes effective. There's also a lot of other disclosure type information that comes out of that process. So today, this all is as of June 30, 2025. So anything that's happened after that is not reflected one way or the other. It does use the assumptions that are adopted by the board, and that was done in 2023. There is a scheduled experience study before next year. So this next May or so, we'll go through that process again, and that's when we look at those assumptions and make sure that's the most appropriate set of assumptions to use on an ongoing basis. We're currently not expecting any significant changes to those, but that is a process to expect before next year's results. And we do have all the different plans covered by the system today. This is a new slide to show kind of all the different plans that are administered through ERSRI and sizes and how we get to the whole that are shown on the ACFR. And so you can see that there are several defined benefit plans. The ERS plan, which is state and teachers combined, is how that's reported. TSP, MERS. You can see MERS is up to assets, about $2.5 billion there. We have the state police, all the different smaller plans. And then, of course, the defined contribution plan, which is a component that sometimes is not included in the results as they're discussed. But you can see there's about almost $2.5 billion in that defined contribution plan. It's been accumulated. And so the total across all the different plans and assets, about 14.7 billion. And you can see that compares to the total liability across all the plans of about 19 billion. So the defined contribution plan is fully funded. That's how that works. To liabilities and equity for the assets. You can see a majority of the unfunded liabilities over the ERS plan, about 4 billion of the 4.3 billion. But it's something we just kind of wanted to point out. There's a lot more going on than just one plan, but also why the numbers you see under the big numbers that's reported on the, say, the website of 14.7. Well, then how does that break out to all the individual components? All right. So state teachers plan. There was market returns around 8%, 8.3%, which exceeds the 7% assumption for the year. There was also positive results from the last few years. And so the smoothing mechanism was able to recognize quite a bit of positive, around $132 million of what we call actuarial gain, which means the unfunded liability decreased by 132 million more than we expected it to. Over the last 20 years, the actual compound return has been around 6.9%. And since 1995, which is the data that we have going back, 7.4% since 1995. So because of that investment return, but also the funding mechanisms, the unfunded liability decreased a little more than expected. We expected to go in total between state and teachers from 4.69 billion down to 4.5 billion, and it actually came in at 4.37 billion. The aggregate fund ratio is up to 66.3%. And then, of course, the big item that comes out of the valuation results is the contributions. And you can see that came in we're currently projecting about $11 million lower than what last year's results was projected for fiscal 28. Heavily driven by the teacher side. We'll show you that as we get more into more details. So this was a slide we presented last year. We've got some good feedback on it. So again, it's just to kind of set up what the different terms are and how we get to them. It's kind of like a balance sheet. On one side, we have the liabilities. So that's what's owed in the future to the current membership. And you can see how that breaks out between people that are currently in payment, people that are actively working, which is the goal, 4.4 billion or so. And then there's inactives, which are people that used to be actively employed, generally maybe investing, but maybe not. Maybe just have a member's account balance on with the system, but they haven't gotten to the point where they can start to pull out the benefit yet. So they're late. And so that's a total of 12.9 billion of value. And so on the asset side, we need to match that exactly. That's how balance sheets work. We have to be in balance. The assets have to equal the liabilities. On a smooth basis, state and teachers combined, you can see the total assets about 8.6 billion. And so the difference between that liability and the assets is what the unfunded liability is, currently about $4.37 billion. Funded ratio is just taking that asset value, the 8.6, divided into the 12.9. So just what portion of the 12.9 is covered by assets right now. So these terms and these calculations here are very right now. They're just snapshot top values. They really don't take into account contributions in the future or anything that's really happening from a funding perspective going forward. Just a snapshot value. Now, one thing that's important to remember and understand about that 12.9 billion is that's a discounted number. That assumes investment earnings are 7% going forward to help pay for those. In our process, we actually run out what benefit payments are expected to be made to all members going forward, not discounted. So that's really what we start with. And you can see here on an undiscounted basis, that's about $42 billion is expected to be paid out to the state teacher group going forward. Now, some of that's not being paid for 40, 50, 60 years out into the future, but that is benefits that have already been owed, already been earned for past service, but that will be paid out over time. The middle column there shows you that how that breaks out between when we take the liabilities 12.9 billion, we're saying, okay, well, using a 7% discount rate, we expect of the 42 billion, about 29 billion of it to be paid for with investment earnings. That investment earnings should be generated and pay that out to help make those benefit payments. And that's how we calculate the 12.9 billion. And basically, instead of saying it's a liability, you can actually look at it as a target asset. How much assets should we have today to make sure that we could pay out all those benefits without being any contributions against them? Now, currently, we have the 8.6 billion. And this little exercise here is to show why it's so important we continue to get contributions. if the contributions towards that unfunded liability were to stop, it would only last about 14 years. Clearly have a lot more benefit payments well past 14 years for current membership. And so that's why those contributions are necessary. As we move forward and we get better funded, that 14 years should tick up. We should start filling in more and more of the gap. Theoretically, once we're 100% funded, the second and the third columns will be exactly the same. That's the goal. Now, one way to fill in that gap would be just to write a check, right? So about $4.4 billion just lump sum would fill the gap in immediately. And that's what the third column there, that's what the unfunded liability actually represents. What lump sum of money would need to come in right now to make up that difference. That would be a pretty big ask. And so it's done over an amortization schedule, a payment schedule to fill in that gap over time. That was set up back in 2011 as a 25-year payment schedule to fill in that gap. We currently have about 10, 11 years left there, depending on the state and teachers. And so because of that, anytime you finance something, you're going to pay a little bit more, right? You have to pay some interest. And so you can see currently expect contributions around 6.4 billion, pay off the 4.4 billion over the next 10 years for state, 12 years for teachers. But you can just see that's the financing strategy that's been put in place, and what the total contributions are expected to be. Now that policy is called layered amortization, which is the gold standard. This is what most pension plans have now moved to. This was put in place, and you can see here what it does is itemize out every year as a new positive or negative occurs. It sets it up payment schedule, and that dollar amount is fixed. Once it's fixed, it's set in place, and then we run that out. And every year we add up all the individual layers. That's what's called layered amortization. And you can see up at the very top how much of the original 2011 legislation remains. Around $1.5 billion of unfunded liability still in place from that original payment schedule, with 8 years left beginning in 2028. So a total of 10 years left beginning right now. You can see those dollar amounts are set, and they're growing at about 2.5% a year for state, or exactly 2.5% per year. And that schedule's been set in place, and you can just kind of follow along how many assumption changes or experience, plus or negative. This year at the very bottom, you can see new experience was a credit. So that means results came in better than expected. And so that comes in as a credit of 35 million. And that also provides a credit against the contributions. So that dollar amount across the bottom, we've made this point for years, is that dollar amount there is actually much more predictable and dependable than the contribution rate. The contribution rate is divided by payroll, which is moving around, but that dollar amount is pretty consistent and quite predictable. So here's the history of that unfunded liability, what it's been over time. Teachers is the top number, state employees is the bottom number. And just like a amortization, a mortgage amortization in 2017, when the investment return assumption has changed to 7, that pushed up the unfunded liabilities. And since that point, you can see it's been coming down, just like a mortgage or any sort of loan, up front. It's not coming down as fast, right? There's more interest. Then as you get more principal paid, it starts to come down faster. 2023 was and 2024 was the legislation to change the benefits a little bit. So that pushed it back a little bit, but now we're back on the same schedule. We expect this to continue to decline as we go forward. This shows you that projection. This is the projection unfunded liability. You can see compared to last year's projection is the light blue bars, and the dark blue bars are this year's. You can see very, very similar projections out for that unfunded liability, and kind of the speed it should be coming down. Most of it being paid off in that 2035 time frame. Now, this is a metric that's we've introduced this year, really probably for the first time for Rhode Island, but it's a metric that's used a lot in the financial world. Financial analysts or bond raters are going to use this. And it's like if you go to a bank, it's similar to a debt to income ratio. So, a mortgage, $100,000 mortgage is different for someone making $500,000 than it is for someone making $1,000 here, right? And this is the same idea. It's how big is the debt not compared to itself, which is kind of like the funded ratio. The funded ratio is the assets compared to the plan itself. This is more of, well, how big is the debt compared to the underlying entity that has to cover the debt? So payroll is a reasonable approximation of that. And so this is actually kind of like a canary in the coal mine number, that this should be moving faster and sooner than the unfunded liability itself will move. And so you can see here, back in 2017, that peaked at around 3 times payroll. So the unfunded liability is around 3 times payroll in 2017, and that has declined down now to close to 2 times payroll just over this last decade. So this is a very positive trend, quickly improving, and we expect it to continue to improve. But we just kind of wanted to point this out just because it jumped out as a big change.
So it caused that to go up 2017.
That was the change in investment return assumption to 7%.
Okay.
You know, just like the unfunded liability. Okay, so projecting forward the funded ratio, updating our chart here. You can see the X continues to follow the red line pretty good. So just to remind everyone, the red line was drawn originally back in 2010, 11, come out of the legislation of what the impact statement expected the funded ratio path to be. We've updated it 3 times for things that occurred. One was a change in the mediation, then occurred 2 or 3 years later. We updated it for the change in investment return assumption, and then we updated it last year for the legislation on the benefit changes. But otherwise, it should just be the experience. So it's a way to track the experience of what's actually happening compared to what was expected. And you can see here, really the X that we put on here for 2025 for the first time is really starting to be ahead of the red line by a significant, quite a bit, about 3%. And then the blue dotted line is what we project it to be as we run out there. 76% funded in 2029 is currently the expectations for when we reach 75% funded. But one thing you can see here actually working is the funding mechanism. So the funding mechanism actually is going to correct positive and negative. And so because we're a little ahead of schedule now, the contributions going forward are going to be a little bit less than they were originally expected to be. And so you can see by the end, it's actually contracted back to kind of bring you back to the red line. Be a way to think about it. So it will self-correct. So if we were behind schedule, contributions go up to get us back to the red line. In this case, since we're a little ahead of schedule, contributions track to again push it back.
Go. That's not an actual reduction of content. It's reduction of
No.
percent of content.
It's a reduction of percent, and it's also just not growing as fast as we originally. Yeah. Okay, so just compare to your peers, where does the different plans sit? So Rhode Island ERS. This is a NASRA fund survey, so National Association of State Retirement Administrators. They are a group that does a lot of education and research for public plans. They do a survey every year. This is about the 125 largest plans in the country. You do participate in that survey. And you can see that Rhode Island's funded ratio as of 2020, the 2024 survey, so that way everyone's on the same basis, was 106 out of 125. And so you have moved up the line a little bit, but still, the bottom quartile of funded ratios. However, your amortization period of what you have left is shorter than a lot that are left. And so if we update this each year, you should expect the red line to be moving up compared to everyone else, except that also a lot of other plans are also doing well. We currently 94 of the plans are expected to be fully funded in the next 20 years. So the whole message of public plans 10, 15 years from now is going to be quite different than what it has historically. A lot of plans are doing similar to what's done here, which is get a strong disciplined funding policy and follow it, and you can see that it actually does work. So this is payroll, because this is going to be the big story as we get into the details between state and teachers here in a second. This is payroll over the last decade. Top line is teacher payroll. The bottom line is state employee payroll. The dotted line is if payroll grew exactly at the respective growth assumptions. So teachers were assuming 2%. State employees, we assume 2.5%. And you can see the actual last decades were very close. Those two values. The state employees is a little bit ahead of that 2.5%, mostly driven by this last year. And it's more volatile, if you'll notice. It's more up and down, which makes sense because the state employee plan is more like a single employer plan, right? And so there's gonna be kind of one negotiation set versus teachers is spread across several employers. So you're gonna get more dampening impact. But as we get into the results, this is really the story. If you'll notice, the teachers' payroll actually came down from 2024 to 2025. So on the teacher side or on the state employee side, headcount expanded quite a bit. Salary increases were bigger than expected. And so payroll growth overall was much bigger than expected. On the teacher side is the opposite. Headcount actually contracted. Salary increases were lower than the expectations. And so payroll actually contracted. And so as we get into the contribution rate calculations, what you'll see is the dollar amounts aren't necessarily changing that much, but because your payroll is changing, the contribution rates are kind of moving in different directions compared to each other.
With regard to teachers, Joe, as we're seeing declining enrollment throughout the state. So
Right.
along with declining enrollment potentially comes contracting of systems. And then,
Right.
you know,
And
teachers,
so,
there'll be less teachers, so that would increase the percent of payroll
right,
to match that.
right, if that occurs. And we showed, I believe it was 2 years ago, we did the stress test where we were to get a sustained 2% reduction per year in the teacher headcount with that impact stuff, and it really didn't make a big difference.
Okay.
Yeah, the contribution rate itself ticked up a little bit, but since so much of it is a dollar driven, and we don't have that long, like if we had 25 years left, then yeah, that would start to really matter. Okay. Only 10 years left. There's enough self-correcting mechanisms that's gonna be okay.
Joe?
Sure. I have a question about bringing up a point that came up in the committee meeting about teachers. We did talk about the declining headcount. It's not necessarily surprising to me, given the kind of flat or declining student demographics, the wave of federal funding that came in the past couple of years that's drying up. But a specific question, and maybe this is a discussion for the group or a follow-up for ERSRI, is in recent years, first because of COVID, and then on a temporary basis, we've expanded the flexibility for teachers working in retirement. And every month in our board packet, we receive a listing of hundreds of teachers that are retired and working in retirement, presumably not contributing to the plan. Many of them, especially early in the year, they're listed as only working a few days. The vast majority are working under 90 days, but it is the beginning of the school year. So I assume many of them will exceed that 90-day threshold later in the year. Ordinarily, my understanding is that that's something that would not be allowed, but there is currently a statute that expires at the end of the year that allows for greater flexibility. I think it would be important for the board to understand if that's having a material impact on the headcount. We see the anecdotes every month, but I don't really have a basis for comparison compared to a couple of years ago or 5 or 7 years ago as to whether or not the number of teachers that we're seeing in our monthly update is perhaps enough to move the needle. It's hundreds of teachers that are on that list. Each page has about 40 entries, and we get 4 or 5 pages of listing teachers working in retirement. I don't know how many, maybe you're able to answer how many teachers are, if teachers are in the plan, and what would be a number that would be sufficient to move it by 0.5% or 1%?
Right.
Because we
And
would,
Joe, and if you want to mention how you recommended that for every teacher that came out of retirement, the sending district had to contribute.
Right.
And so that's what helps us in the long run, right?
Right. I believe that's in place.
Correct, that's in
Yeah.
place.
what's the contribution rate? Is it
The state, the employer pays its
the
Yeah.
full amount?
full.
Yeah, the full amount.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's no benefit to the retiree, but at least we don't lose the funds coming into the fund.
Right. Right.
I was going to say, you have to understand why there are so many people working after retirement. The basic reason is because they cannot fill the available
Right.
teaching positions right now. So it is, again, it's a vicious circle. If we had qualified teachers to fill those slots, they would certainly be the priority. But this is what's forcing so many retired teachers, among other things, but we'll discuss that later.
And that's not just an issue in Rhode Island. All of my clients similar discussions about how do we get more teachers in it.
Exactly.
But yes, we do get employer contributions on that. And so one way to think about it is it's, as long as the proportions stay similar, then that is all baked in. It's, I think your question is, and I think it's a valid one we should look into is, well, how much has that changed, right? Because if it's 300 now, but it was 150, well, that could be our difference, because I think our headcount went down by 150 or 200 people. So yeah, we'll look into that for the fair study for sure. And then, of course, we need to know, what's the impact as that, assuming that legislation does expire, right? What will impact? So. Okay, so for state employees, so what you're looking at is the first column on the left is last year's contribution rate. And then projected payroll two years out. And so projected contributions. And so we determine projected payroll. We take last year's actual payroll that we know occurred, and then we just grow it with that 2.5% growth rate to the year that we're looking at. So these are very directly proportionate to whatever actual last year's payroll was. So when we project out this year's result, the top line is normal costs. So that's the value of the benefit that's being earned. So someone with 10 years of service, they're going to earn that 11th year. With the value of that, or another way to think about it is if we were 100% funded, that's all the contributions that we would need to actually just pay the new benefits. And so you can see it's 792 last year. We expect it to drop to 781 because as people retire out of the older plan, they're replaced by people only in the new plan. The normal cost is dropping down. You can see it came in at 787, so not quite as much as the 781. Driven heavily by some more people were reclassified into that MERS police and fire benefit structure. 2 years ago, there was legislation that introduced MERS police and fire benefit structure for some people in the state employees plans. It's people at the airport, the firefighters and different groups. And so last year, a majority of the people had been classified by the valuation data census, but clearly there was some more to go. So there's a few more classified. And that's the main reason we didn't come in at 781. Member contribution rate is a blend. So yes, state employees general contribute to 375, but this MERS police and fire group contributes more, correction officers contribute more. So the blend is the 436 to 438 there. So the employer's normal cost, the portion the employer's paying for those new benefits, went down from 356 to 349. We expected it to go down a little bit more than that, but you can see the trend is reasonable. The amortization rate, that's the portion, that's that layered amortization component we talked about. Take the dollar amount off that schedule, divide it by the payroll that we expect for the given year. And so we expect that to stay the same. So last year result 25.89% of pay. We expect it to come in the same. However, you can see it dropped significantly to 24.48. That's because the payroll grew so much because we need to get back to the certain dollar amount. So the dollar amount set, payroll's a lot higher than we don't need quite as much contribution rate to get there. So you can see that even though the contribution rate itself decreased quite a bit, once you go all the way down to the projected contribution, it's only about $1 million less overall in projected contributions from this process. Now, one thing that's occurred, you'll be able to see this pretty clearly in a graph in a minute, is this surge in payroll has led to higher contributions that have actually gone to the plan the last couple of years. Like this year especially, there was quite a bit more contribution because contribution rate was already set coming into fiscal 25. Payroll was a lot higher, which we received more dollars than we originally expected. But anyway, so that's the message for state employees, is that basically the surge in payroll pushed down the contribution rate. We get back to about $8. On the teacher side, it's kind of the opposite. Because their payroll actually contracted, you can see the dollar amount of contributions actually went down a lot. So even though the contribution rate didn't change that much, the dollar amount of contribution from what was projected, about $10 million less than projected from last year. And this again is payroll related. As far as contribution rate goes, the same national survey, where does the contribution rates sit compared to the national peers? You can see that the state and teacher plan is about the 10th highest in the country compared to other groups that are in Social Security. MERS is pretty much in the middle of the distribution there peers. Okay, so now if we turn and start to look forward, we have the projected dollar amount from the state employee plan. And so the light blue bars are last year's projection. You can see in 2026 growing to around 310 million in 2035. Because of that surge in payroll, you can see up front, it actually surged up to 289 million projected for fiscal 26. So that's actually higher than was originally projected. By 2028, it pulls back to be in line with where the mechanism expected to be, and then it really runs out to be the same pattern after from 2028 through 2035 as previously expected. And then that big amortization base falls off from 2011 legislation. And so that's why there's the big drop in 2036. This pattern from 2028 through 2035 is growth at about 1.7% a year throughout this period, very consistent with previous projections. Now, due to some questions last week, we included a little bit longer view of this pattern. So what you're looking at here is the state contributions that have gone into the plan historically, and then adding on those next 10 or 12 years of projection. So you can see the dollar amounts were actually, and then we drew a kind of a straight line across here to see the long-term trend. The dollar amounts have grown pretty consistently throughout this period. And then this last couple of years have really surged up with the inflation and the higher wages. And so the mechanism actually self-corrects. So the mechanism has noticed that's occurred. That's why the contribution rates are now lower going forward. So it kind of pulls back to this midline, and then we get the same rate of growth after that. So the 1.7 from today forward, or from that is, a lot of it's recognizing the fact that we've actually had more growth in the past. And so it's kind of self-correcting back to that midline as we look forward. So 3.4% annual growth over the full term. So finally, let's just stress this result a little bit. This is state, and then the state portion of the teacher plan added together. You can see that the dark bars are what we expect to happen if assumptions are met. The red is what happens if actual returns, market returns, are only 5% going forward throughout the whole 20 years here. And so you can see that, yes, it does lead to more contributions over the next decade than it would be otherwise, but it's only about $35 million more than if we do get 7%. So there's not a lot of sensitivity to returns these next 10 years. I mean, it's always beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? 30 million is 30 million, but for most clients, we do the same thing. The 461 becomes 700 or 800. Okay, so this is a pretty mild stress result here. So, but missing the return assumption by 2% over the next decade is a pretty big miss. But you can see that still get the big drop at 2036 because that amortization base falls off. And then even if we're at 5% going forward, it's just really very difficult and really impossible for the numbers to get back to the kind of numbers that we have now. So much of that was paying off the unfunded liability from 2011.
Just to repeat from the subcommittee meeting, these figures are not inflation adjusted.
What do you mean by that?
Well, inflation is, you're assuming an inflation rate of, well, back to us, 2.7%, of which you're
2.5%.
2.5%, okay? And is that figure in this? At the subcommittee meeting, I asked a question, and you stated on the record that the figures were not inflation
They're
adjusted.
not inflation adjusted in that these dollar amounts are not, they are exactly what we expect them to be. So generally, when you ask if something is inflation adjusted, if there's a payment that's 20 years from now of a certain dollar amount, inflation adjusted means we would discount that dollar amount
Exactly,
because we would want to make it in today's terms.
exactly. That's what I'm looking at.
So these are actual dollar amounts that we expect. Now, inflation is built into this process. We are projecting out there'll be inflation, and that will be in the wages and everything as we move forward here. But these dollar amounts we're showing actual nominal dollar amounts.
Joe,
$26.
sorry, Greg, I agree with that, sorry. Please,
No, I just wanted to specify, you're calculating in $2026, $2025.
No, I'm not, I'm calculating in US dollars.
Based upon 2025 value.
Now, no, a dollar's a dollar.
No, it isn't.
In 100 years from now, a dollar will be a dollar.
Right.
The value of the dollar
There's no
against
inflation.
today is different, but the dollar is a dollar.
That's what I mean, our
I understand what you're
contribution
saying,
rate
but
needs to be adjusted.
Well, the contribution rate would be theoretically, I mean, the same because payroll is growing through this period.
For state employees, for teachers, not so much,
Right,
as was brought up at the subcommittee meeting.
right. But this graph is not, like, we didn't take the 231 and say, well, that's 20 years out in the future, so we should drop it down and in 2025 dollars would be, 160 million or something. Like, we haven't brought the whole thing down in that way. It's just a straight dollar amount. But inflation is built into the process.
go ahead, Joe.
I just wanted to bring up a significant point of concern and discussion at the committee meeting was when you look at this chart, those blue bars don't seem to be growing at the rate of inflation, and that was a point of concern. I just wanted to point out on slide 21, GRS pointed out at the committee meeting that the real reason why these contributions were not expected to grow at 2.5% or the rate of wage inflation was because we're kind of over contributing right now. So it's really that 2026 number might be higher than we thought it was supposed to be. So the underlying trend remains growing with inflation. I just wanted to say, I think that slide 21 does a very effective job at showing that. And if you show that long-term trend where contribution rates are in fact growing at about 3.4% per year, you can see that in 2025 and 2026, because of higher than expected payroll growth and the fact that we contribute employer contributions as a percent of covered payroll, we kind of accidentally, if you would, contributed more than we expected to the pension plan. So because we're contributing too much right now, the rate of growth going forward will be modestly below inflation because of that kind of self-correcting mechanism. But I appreciate seeing the long-term trend where, in fact, if you look back to 2013, over the long term, pension contributions are growing at 3.4%. And I think that helps to illustrate that, the reason why we follow an actuarial methodology is because we're looking at 5, 10, 20-year horizons here, and not necessarily a 1 or 2 or 3-year horizon. In any given year, especially because this state employee plan only covers one employer, in any given year, we're probably going to miss that wage growth assumption, perhaps by a significant margin, as we have in recent years. So I think that slide 21 shows that long-term trend very effectively.
But that's for state employees, not teachers,
Yeah, teachers, obviously, something the opposite is happening.
which is a larger group.
Sandra?
I have a question, since you brought up slide number 21. Oh, no, it's not 21, then it is 22. Where we see that drop, and I've asked you this question in the past. Now I'm going to ask you, how does that drop affect the members of ERSRI? Will that mean that they will be contributing less, which I sincerely doubt, or that the employers and employers, the state and the municipalities will be contributing less?
So the latter currently is the expectation. When this was put in place in 2010, right, that the employers contribute that much more throughout this period of time.
Right,
Currently, the mechanism would be, just like you're seeing here, that it would be on the employers.
yes,
We all know this is a political world, right? So what actually happens in 2036, there's a little bit left to be determined, right? I mean, if someone was asking me about that future, what that future plan was look like, I think lowering the member rate would have a lot of benefit. Like I think lowering the member contribution rate into this plan, once you're out there,
but as of
would have.
right
but Right now,
now,
that's not built into anything.
right,
That's
this
something
is not
that's-
reflective of any change in employee contributions. This reflects employer.
Right.
And yeah, I do have a problem with that. I do have a problem with that because our fiduciary responsibility is to the fund, but it is also to our members. And it is not to the state and to municipalities. That is not where our responsibility lies. And this whole entire slide number 22 is based upon the fact that state and municipalities will be contributing far less. Is that fair, given our fiduciary responsibility?
Do you wanna just review what the amortization period was and why
Right,
it has
so-
an end date? Is a refresh?
Right, so, I mean, you're actually making more of a policy argument than you are,
I
An
understand that,
actuarial
I
or board
understand that.
Um,
Actuarially, you are following the path of 2011.
right,
And this is just verifying the fact that based upon 2011, it is going according to plan. Right. But it does not take into account at all the 60,000 members of ERSRI.
right. So, yeah, so we talked a little bit about how the current mechanism in place. And there's one thing I want to caveat before we get into this is there's explicit costs and I would argue implicit costs. And directly on this page, you're looking at the amortization schedule. The employers, the state has picked this up. So this is what I would call explicit costs, which is they're paying right out of their budget, they're paying for this component to pay off this unfunded liability. So once they pay off that unfunded liability, so for example, the original 2011 base, the 1.5 billion that's remaining, that was about 2 billion when we started. The state is the one that's been paying that explicitly. And so when that stops, then that was stopped. They don't need that anymore. The employees have, and this is why I'm using the word explicitly, the employees have not paid towards that in this mechanism. Now, I would argue they have paid for it because benefit changes, salaries were lower than they would, than they would be if this wasn't occurring, right? So there's always a bigger picture to look at. But I'm saying for this mechanism with the pension plan, this component of the contributions is going to pay the unfunded liability. The employers are the one that are paying that. So when the unfunded liabilities are paid off, that was stopped for them. And so that's where so when we go over here to the normal cost page, this employer normal cost, this is the value of the benefit that's being provided to members on an ongoing basis. So you hire somebody tomorrow, they're earning a benefit. We're about 7.87% of pay. Of that, they're paying $438, and the employer's paying $349 would be, kind of ongoing. 24.5% of the contribution is all just going to pay off that unfunded liability, and that's the component that will stop come 2035. So, what happens actually politically and what the policy decision on that, is beyond, I think, this board's purview and definitely mine. But I could see a world where, as that's coming down, the member rate is also coming down. I could see that.
But these figures, they do not reflect employee mortality rate. Because there's a huge delta here, and I'm looking at slide 14, at least from the board, and I'm looking at, we're gonna hit the point of 75%, 76% in 2029. Between now and that date, the retiree side of the house will lose, based on the old estimate, approximately 5,000 retirees. That's a huge number
By when?
by 2029. Okay,
Are you
the
talking about
former director
retiring in
Karpinski,
2012 or retiring?
no,
now?
from now. Director Karpinski had told me previously that we're losing about 1,200 retirees per year. You go forward 4 years and you're looking at 5,000 retirees who have passed on. Most of them probably would have been in the old system, not the new system. And as Sandra pointed out, the fiduciary responsibility is to the dollar amount, but also to the members of the system. And that's what I'm concerned about. At one of the previous training sessions, I had asked, when it was pointed out our fiduciary responsibility is to the fund, and I asked the question, it's not just the dollar amount, the fund, or the pension system also consists of the retirees and the future retirees. And the answer that I received back was absolutely. So I'm looking at another 5,000 Rhode Islanders losing or going away in the interim period before we reach that 74% number. And that concerns me as a member of representative of retirees and future retirees. That number, I mean, you're talking 70, 79. This is your own 2029. That's your own number.
So you want us to keep people from dying?
No, I'm not saying
Yes,
that
but
at
I think
all.
we should.
I'm just saying,
That you're introducing.
Wait a minute.
People die, can't do anything.
We-
no, I understand that, but I want the board to understand the reality of how many people will pass on
Sure.
between our decisions made today and 2029 when they reach the 75% number
Yeah,
on your own slide. That's a different.
that's a
And
good
your
thing.
job is to make sure that they get the benefit the statute says they will get while they stay alive. I mean,
So-
that's,
So there's still a lot to cover. Can we just
Yeah.
keep going and then ask
Okay.
questions at the end?
all right, so. Okay, so here, just to make sure everyone understands, we show a lot of straight lines and that kind of thing. We know the future is more uncertain than that. And so it's to kind of just give a range of outcomes. And again, what we're always looking for is the trend, not necessarily the data point at any point in time, because you could always come up with a different set of assumptions and come up with different probabilities. It's but the trends are actually telling you a lot more. And so one thing we're always looking at is that unfunded liability. What's the likelihood that that is going to be smaller? You can see we have a very, very high likelihood looking out the next 5 years that unfunded liability is going to get smaller. We've added now the 75% funded ratio because that is when hopefully the increases for retirees will no longer be reduced compared to what the statutory full one is. You can see that that improved quite a bit, now 59% likelihood by 2039. And if it doesn't happen in 2039, you can see 70% likelihood by 2030. So that's kind of our range that we are currently expecting. Now we left the 80% on there just because that's kind of historically what has been the measure, and that way we have the trend. And you can see that in 2024 there's a big drop. That was when the benefits were changed themselves, but even that had quite a bit of an improvement this year that will be 80% funded by 2030. And then the 100% funded by 2040. And that the reason these statistics on that one aren't higher than maybe you would expect them to be is because there's a lot of years of uncertainty built out there. So again, we're looking at the trend, and you can see the improvement there from 24 to 25. So again, all the probabilities are moving in the favor, and so that's good. But just to give you an idea that it's going to be a rate. It's not going to be that. Okay, so just to summarize for the state and teachers, employer contributions projected around $11 million lower between the two plans. It's really about $1 million lower for state, about $10 million lower for teacher groups. We do expect the unfunded liability to decline. We also expect the contribution rates to slowly decline because that's people are retiring out of the older plans, replaced in the new structure. But also just a reminder, there's an experience study before next year, so we will revisit mortality and different things. But we're currently not anticipating significant changes from that. So any question on the state and teacher one specifically? Paul's gonna move into all the other plans.
All right, well, we're about halfway home here, so we're gonna shift gears just a touch and talk about the post-retirement increase calculation that happens each and every year. So in 2026, we calculated that number to be 3.34%. So as you recall, it's made up of two pieces. The first is investment return related. So we calculate what the 5-year return is and subtract 5% from that and take 1/2, and that becomes half of that calculation. So the 5-year return was 8.68%, so doing very well in terms of that smooth return. The other piece is the change in CPI, and change in CPI was just slightly over 3%, and so that's limited to 3%. And so we take half of that, so we add those two numbers together, and that's how we get to that 3.34%. As you can see, the last couple of years, it's a little bit higher than we saw in 2025 and also in 2024 and a little bit higher than in 2023. So this is the highest, the COLA we've seen in the last few years. The limit that we calculate, it's going to grow by that 3.34%. So the 2027 limit will be 32,559. And we have these different groups of members that are going to receive the various COLAs. So the first are those folks that were retired before July 1, 2012, and will receive that full statutory COLA. Then we have that group that retired after 2012, and they're going to receive 1/4 of the increase until we reach 75%, and that COLA is fully restored for that group. As Joe mentioned, our probabilities of having that COLA restored in the 2029 valuation, they keep going up a little bit, so it's really putting us in a nice position to see that. And it's sort of hard to believe that that's only 3.5 years from now. So we're really approaching that 2029 valuation pretty quickly. We have some demographic information here. This just splits up the retirees for state and teachers between those three groups. So those folks that are going to have the full COLA, the 3.34%, you can see that roughly makes up about 60% of the group. There's 6,470 members. That group that's in the middle there that will be eligible for the 1/4. These are the people retired after 2012 that have passed their delay period. So about 3,000 members in the state plan. And then we have everyone else here that is not quite or has not gotten through their delay period. So about 2,000 retirees. The numbers are pretty similar. On the teacher side, just a little bit higher, but the distributions are pretty similar. And you can see that I think the average benefits are sort of interesting to look at. We compare the average benefits to the cap. And the average benefit for the state's plan is a little bit lower than the cap. And then for our teachers, their average benefits are a little bit higher for that 2012 group.
One thing to point out on that, especially that teacher group where the benefit is significantly higher, they have a lot of service like that. The average service for that group there is really high. It's like 30 years or something. So that's what compared to the state employee is like less than 20. So that's the big reason for the delta. A lot of years of service.
Just a question. What is that exactly the average benefit of 29,917? Specifically, what does that refer to?
So we take that population at 6,470 folks, and we see what benefit are each of them collecting.
Right.
And we just take the average of those benefits.
Okay.
And so there's some higher, some lower, but the average is right at that 29.
But that's 29,917. That does not go to the member.
Well, that's the gross, that's the. So.
That's their pension.
I mean, I don't know if there's taxes and stuff taken out, but that should be the amount.
Okay, so the average teacher retiree will be earning 29,978.
That's the state. The teachers will be a little bit higher. They're in the second bucket there.
Oh,
the
oh, I
second
see.
bucket,
Okay.
48.29.
All right.
Right, but I was trying to make the point because it wasn't that the pay difference between the two groups while they were active was that big of a difference. It's because those teachers have very long careers.
We stay at it.
One of the other metrics that we're tracking is, when we calculate that restoration of full COLA or the full post-retirement increase at 75%. It's based upon these four plans, so state teachers, the state police, and the judges. And the spoiler alert here, however state teachers go, that's how the entire plan is gonna go. They make up about 97% of the total liability. But we still have to figure in the other two smaller plans in this calculation. So when we look at that aggregate funded ratio down there in the lower right-hand corner, 67%. And that's the number that we're gonna be tracking to see if it hits that 75% either in 2029 or 2030. Last year, this number was 66.3%. So we did see some nice improvement there, and expected improvement. Again, we'll make up quite a bit of ground here in the next 4 years. We just have a short-term projection, comparing last year's projection to the projection for this year's valuation. And you can see that the 2025, so that's 1 year projection from last year, and then the actual result from this year, we're about 0.9% ahead of schedule right now. So we came in a little bit higher than the expectation. And you start to roll that forward, and you can see there's the 2029 level. Last year's projection predicted about 75.3% funded. This year we're at 76% funded. So again, that's the number we're going to be looking at just to look at that restoration of COLA. One of the things that Joe mentioned earlier on that chart where we had the projection of the original RISA projections versus what's actually happened, and we saw those lines starting to converge. We're sort of seeing that same issue here. So we're now sitting at about a 1% difference between the projection from last year and this year. Over time, your funding mechanism is going to again push those numbers together. So if you were to run out this projection over 15, 20 years, you would see those numbers pretty much come right together and sit right on top of each other. So the mechanism in place is constantly trying to adjust us back onto that predicted path. That's really set in statute. So again, this is all, I think very positive information, and I think things are moving in the right direction. The probabilities of reaching that 75% continue to improve. So again, you get a lot of, I think there's a lot of happiness here in this particular result right now. So with that, we'll shift gears and we'll talk about MERS. It was a rather uneventful, if you will, year for MERS. You didn't throw any very difficult unit name for us to try to pronounce, so I appreciate that. So no new legacy units, no new closed units, no merged units. We did have a couple of units that were considering merging, but opted not to. So that may be something that could be revisited in the future for that. No new post-retirement increase elections. And then we have that massive report that has details for all 129 of our MERS units. Slide 32 here. We're going to start with looking at the unfunded liability for all of the MERS plans except for the legacy units. We're going to talk about those separately. And one of the big metrics that we calculate and we track every year is that unfunded liability, and that's down from 297 million last year to 247 this year. So almost a $50 million improvement in the unfunded liability. So these plans are doing very well. The aggregate funded ratio across all of the MERS units minus the legacy plans is over 90% now. So again, just another fantastic result. The MERS plans are very strong. We now have 40 units that are over 100% funded, up from last year, 105 that are over 80% funded, and now 114 that are over 75% funded. So we've improved on all of those metrics. And then we had 2 of the units that have COLA elections or post-retirement increase elections that are now over that 75% threshold. So their COLA is going to be restored in 2026. Slide 33, this is where we just take a look at the aggregate contribution rate for all of the MERS units split in general and MERS police and fire. And maybe we'll just look at the total column just for a minute to get a flavor of what happened over the last year. So we started out at about 13.7%, and then we had a few things that happened that were in our favor, and then just a couple of items that helped increase that rate just a touch. First, asset performance. Again, we had a really nice year, just like we saw in state teachers. That pushed the rate down about 0.62%. The fact that the COLA, the 3.34, was a little bit more than our assumption. That's going to push the rate up a little bit. individual salary increases. We saw this really more on the police and fire side. The police and fire increases were a bit higher than we would expect. So that's going to push the rate up. But then that also has the offsetting impact of having higher projected payroll. And so when we look at that contribution as a percent of payroll, gonna push it down a little bit. So those two items were more or less offsetting. And then we saw non-economic liability growth sort of in our favor, so we saw gains. So not as many retirements as we would have expected, more terminations, things of that nature, that pushed the rate down. And, all told, starting out at 13.7, going down to 12.8. So it's showing some relief for some of these MERS units overall. They'll get another positive outcome here. And as these units start to approach everyone being full funded, then their rate's gonna really come down and just sit right around normal cost and expect to be at that level going forward. Slide 34, these are our legacy units. So we have 6 units that came to the system here through the Pathway to MERS legislation. There's Central Falls, and then there's 5 units from West Warwick. And you can see that, the reason that we excluded these from that original calculation of UAL, which is $247 million for all the other units. You can see down at the bottom that their unfunded liability for just these 6 units is north of 173 million. And so these 6 units are not like the other 123. But we are still starting to see some improvement in the funded status. Last year, we were right around 30% funded status for this entire group. And that's up to 33%. And I was tipped off on a question that may be asked prior to this is, are these units contributing what they should be contributing? And so looking at certainly at West Warwick, they contributed about $11.726 million last year. That matches almost to the dollar the amount that was calculated by the prior actuary for fiscal 25.
When you say prior actuary,
Yes.
that is not,
Correct.
they contribute the amount that was recommended by GRS.
So our first recommendation is coming up in 2026. So it's going to be $11.74 million. And what we do for the West Warwick is we issue them a letter saying, here's the dollar amount contribution that you need to make to the plan. And the reason we do that is that because these are closed units, the payroll is declining over time. And so contributing on a percent of pay basis doesn't make a whole lot of sense for plans that have declining payroll. Because we have this really big portion that's going towards paying off the unfunded liability that's expected to grow at 2%, 2.5% every year going forward. And so you have an increase in contribution and declining payroll percentage is going to get out of whack. So it makes a lot more sense for a unit like this to just contribute a flat dollar amount. So again, 11.74 26. It's 12.4 in 27, and then now it's looks like it may have got cut off, but it's around still a little. Oh, I was down at the bottom there. 12.41.
But what is the basis of your 11 point? What is that based on? It's not percent of payroll. It's helping higher, right?
Correct. Right. So we issue them a letter saying, here's what you need to contribute for each of your 5 units, and they make that dollar amount.
What's that number based on?
That number is based on taking the normal cost, the expected normal cost, plus the amount to amortize the unfunded liability for that fiscal year.
That's the employer's contract, the employee's
The employee
contract.
contract, yes, correct. So employer normal cost plus the amortization component.
Is that a special carve out for West Warwick? Is Central Falls following the same process?
They're following the same process. Central Falls has a slightly longer, I believe it's a slightly longer amortization period. But they're on it's the similar path. I don't think we've issued a report for a letter to Central Falls saying contribute a flat dollar amount. So they've been contributing, I believe, as a percent of pay.
Right, so there's a difference between,
There is a little bit of a
so
difference.
Central Falls is contributing percent of pay, which is the way that you calculate it. West Warwick is contributing a flat fee, excluding the percent of pay, It's lower than the percent of pay.
It should theoretically be the same.
Okay,
Yeah, we're just trying to remove the variable out. But theoretically, it should be the same. But we will watch and see what they're actually.
yeah, I have concern about that. Because I knew last year, the percent of payroll exceeded the amount that they paid.
It's sort of difficult,
No, go ahead.
It's difficult for, it's not a massive group of people. And then we have the assumption, so when you ladder out declining payroll over 2 years, if they have a better idea of who's gonna be around, like say maybe next year, who's gonna retire the year after that, as opposed to the assumptions which may predict more payroll falling off than
However, if you follow the assumption, you will pay down the unfunded liability quicker.
potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find how that a lot of the other municipalities are unfunded is getting better?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's a key. Unfortunately, when you're looking at Central Falls and West Warwick, we know that they've all had, major problems. But the other municipalities, I'm not privy to all the numbers now, so I'm kind of guessing, but from what I see is that they are getting better, and that's a good sign.
Absolutely. Again,
There's a lot of, excuse me, there's been a lot of emphasis on that. As a former mayor, I know that back a few years ago, it started, and it's a healthy sign. There's a lot were in trouble.
90%, and that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I think Joe showed some charts earlier that showed, the MERS funded ratio being on the, higher end, much higher end of the spectrum from the NASA survey. And again, we've seen improvements across many of the units as well. So, very good signs coming from those. So any questions on MERS? Obviously details in every single unit in the valuation report. If you see anyone that you have a question on, certainly let us know. We can talk through how the contribution rate changed or how the funded ratio changed. All right, so let's just cover the last few plans. We have our wonderful judges plan. Judges continue to be well funded. $7 million surplus, so 106.3% funded. They saw, judges just don't want to retire. And
So
our assumptions assume that some of them will retire, but when they don't, it creates a gain. So that's what we saw here. There was a little bit of a loss in the salary side, so salary increases were a little bit higher for this group, but typically with judges plans, you might see a few years of salary gains and then a big increase at some point.
they lost in salary.
Well, their salary increases were higher than expected. So
That's a surprise.
they personally gained the plan.
Excuse me.
Yeah. But here you look at the contribution right down at the bottom, the normal cost of the cost of accruing benefits, 18.44%. And then they have a little bit of a credit from their overfunded status there. So looking at about a 16% contribution for the judges. And what that contribution is going to do is going to effectively just move or keep that funded ratio right at that 106%. And that's the strategy that's in place here. For our state police plan, this is one of those years where we had a new recruit class come in. Again, we'll go some years without having anyone new come in. And this year we had about 18 members coming in. When you look at their unfunded liability, it's up a little bit from where it was last year. But the reason for that is that this year it's incorporating the liability from that select group of members who had their final average compensation periods lower from 5 years to 3 years. Since that's being considered in this valuation, that increased the liability by about $2.6 million. Still, doing rather well in the funded ratio, 88.4%. So even with that benefit change, not much deviation in the funded ratio. And then we look at the normal cost, 11.81%. And then the prior service cost of that amortization piece, 9.27. It's looking at a 21.08% contribution. Had those benefits not been in there and those benefit changes, this would have been roughly 0.6, 0.7% lower than where it is here. TSB, this is our most well-funded plan, $245 million surplus, just over 202% funded. There are some flat dollar contributions that come in from the employees and the employers that participate in this amount. I think it's somewhere maybe in the neighborhood of $1.5 million in total. But from the actual evaluation, there are no contributions needed above and beyond that, to fund this plan, given that it is over 200% funded. And so that's what you see at the bottom there. There's no change in recommended contribution for TSB. Next, we have SPRFP. These are our PAYGO state police. And these are the folks that started to receive funding from the Google money a few years back. With that, I always say this, the very exact dollar amount contribution of $16,387,092. And so they get that amount every single year until they're fully funded. And when the original schedule was set up, the expectation was that they would be fully funded in 2034. We had assumption changes and some experience, and that date was pushed out to 2035, but now we're back to the 2034 date. So we're back right on schedule with where we thought we were going to be when this funding policy was set up. So you look at the funded ratio, 26.4%, that's not that great, but what we're going to see over time, the accrued liability will continue to come down, the assets will come up, and they will eventually meet here by 2034. So not too far into the future. And finally, RIJ, RFT, these are our PAYGO judges. These folks, I think there's 7 of them. They don't have any advanced funding at all. And so we calculate their liabilities based upon a discount rate that is really dictated by the Government Accounting Standards Board, because we still need to report these liabilities on the financial statements, even though they're not being funded. And so that discount rate is going to bounce around every year. So last year, the discount rate was 3.97. This year, it's 5.2%. And so when we increase the discount rates, we're going from about 4% to 5.2%. That's going to lower our liability somewhat, and that's what we saw here. So the accrued liability going from 17.7 million to 15.7 this year is really just a function of that. You know, not only we have some, it's really a function of just that discount rate coming down. There's a nominal asset amount that's effectively used to pay benefits, you know, as they're owed. That's in there, but again, no advanced funding. So there's no expectation that we're going to see this funding ratio improve over time. So that's about it for that group. So finally, just to wrap up, yeah, I think that the message today is that the plan that's in place, that's in statute right now, which we are, you know, beholden to value as your actuary, is working out in real time. And, you know, we're on track to meet those objectives set out there. It's really difficult, you know, patience is something that I certainly struggle with just in my own life, but we almost need to have some patience here and allow these mechanisms and these policies to work out in real time. And we'll see that we're sort of seeing that light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the plan that's in place right now. We are going to have the experience study in 2026 here. And as Joe mentioned, we don't really expect to have too many changes to the assumptions. You know, we feel really good with the assumption set. So maybe some tweaks here and there, but with no big disruptions like we saw a few years back when we had to march that discount rate down to 7%. So overall, you know, again, I think, you know, very positive things are happening, and we'll be happy to take any questions that anyone has.
I fully understand that this whole presentation is based upon plan initiated in 2011. And you've done a very thorough job, except what's missing in the plan from 2011 is the effect that this has had on the members of the ERSRI. Do you have actuarial figures as to how this plan has affected the income with respect to inflation rates, et cetera, because that is part of the plan. It's how has it affected the amount of money in our trust fund, but also how has it affected our members? And I would love to be able to see a report based on this plan, which gives very specific information as to the effects that it has had on our members, because that's why we're here. We're here for the plan, but we're here for the members who are benefiting from it. Is that possible?
I mean, it's definitely possible. I'm not sure I would it's not really part of this plan. It was part of the legislative package, clearly. So
you know.
No, I'm not asking for a policy change.
Right.
I'm asking for, based upon the current plan, what effect has it had on our members?
We can talk with Andrew, we'll see.
Okay.
Any other questions about this presentation? Yeah,
Hi, thank you for your presentation. In your slides, you said Rhode Island ERS ranked 106 of the 125. So did you see any in your evaluation, which area we can do better? Does it matter, this ranking, any matter to the whole, or is anything should be improved in the fund?
Right, that's a good question. So, sometimes I'm hesitant to show that kind of comparative because at one level you can say, well, so what? Like it's everyone kind of got to where they are now in a different way, right? So, and sometimes it does bring up that kind of question. Well, how do I fix it right now? Usually in a pension plan, there's very few things you can do right now. It's almost like an ocean liner. Like it takes a while to turn and change the trajectory. And so those changes were really made 15 years ago and kind of put in place that we begin to improve that. And so every year we're seeing that improve. To speed that up, it's pretty simple. More contributions is the thing that would speed that up the quickest. But I don't think that, I'm not sure that should be the stressed, that we have to be as high funded ratio by next year as we possibly can, because I think it would put a lot of stress in other positions, as far as the budgets and the different things. Knowing that we have about a 10-year payment schedule left, and that's being met in a disciplined approach would be, I think, a more preferable, and that's what the current setup is, about 10 years left. It won't be 100%. So every year you should see that dot moving up.
Joe, would you say that we would need to be careful as the funding ratio improves, not to consider that time to increase benefits? And if you do,
That's not really my opinion. That's
I don't know,
Hmm.
as the funding ratio improves, there may be a tendency for the General Assembly to want to increase benefits because there's a savings projected forward. In that, if that was to happen, the benefit should be paid for as part of it is a policy decision, but it also affects the plan. If you create a benefit that is not funded, it will lower the ratio.
Correct.
So we need to be careful as the funding ratio improves and it's showing a lowering in the funding requirement. That if someone determines that you should be increasing benefits, the benefit should be
Correct.
because that's how we got that.
That's our position.
all right.
Excuse me, I just want to address that because we are here for two reasons. We are here for the fund, we are here for our members. And many of us, or a number of us, were elected to this position to represent the members. I know many people are appointed, and I think as a board, we have to recognize that responsibility to our members. Because the bottom line is they are 100% accurate. This plan is working for the fund. It is not working for our members. And I know that's a policy change, but I would like to see in writing the effect that it has had on our members. I think that's only fair. That's part of our responsibility.
All I'm saying is that if a benefit improvement is proposed, it should be paid for and not considered to be blended into the plan and funded in the future. That's all I'm saying. And I think we should all agree.
Well, I have two questions. I'm operating on assumptions that I received from previous Director Karpinski with regard to mortality rate for the next meeting, and I'm not sure if it would be them or Director Roos. What is the current mortality rate for members of the system? I was told 1,200 a year. Has that changed, or is it higher? Is it lower? If we could have an updated figure on that. The other factor is regard to benefit cost. I was told that the benefits from the system are approximately $1 billion. That's from the three-legged stool, employees, or in investments. The latest I received as the value of the fund as of 31 October was 12,681,933. Going with the 7% baseline rate of return, that's approximately 887 million into the fund. Our investments, using the 8.3, 8.4 that we've come up with, are over $1 billion, which meets the total contribution. That's a delta of 165 million. So I'm just looking at what is the current benefit cost to the system for all members. So if we could have an updated
Yeah,
figure
yeah,
on
so,
that.
so maybe I answer that question, since directed me. So I'll follow up with you after this meeting, give you the full last experience study that has all the assumptions that were approved by the board. This year.
Yeah, well, we would do for a new one. That's why I'm asking.
This year we will do another experience study in which the board would approve the same assumptions. Not the same assumptions, we'll approve the same set of assumptions and make sure we think they're appropriate.
I think that should be an item for the next board meeting, but it's just the one-on-one.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. And they're also posted online. I would then kind of mention what the first part of the presentation showed was a very significant overperformance investment over several years in a row. But our assumption going forward is still that
Still 7%.
And so that's why there's some delta.
But I just wanted to point out that 167 million delta and the overperformance covers the entire cost of the benefits as previously stated. So that's what I was looking at. You're doing a great job.
Am I correct in assuming that that number that he's talking about is built into the smoothing mechanism for the
It'll be in the experience study, but I was just looking for updated information.
So before I turn, someone else, yeah.
Question. And it recommend, or you are going to experience that before 2026. Do you explain what will be included in your experience study?
Sure. So I think an analogy way to think about it, I'm not a pilot, I don't fly plane, but I've seen TV, I've watched people, and there's like dials, right? There's like, your fuel gauge, the horizon indicator, and so if you're flying a plane, you're in the middle of a cloud, you have to just trust, right, your indicators. That's the only way to do it. Well, you better figure out sometime when it's safe to calibrate those indicators, and that's what safe experience study is. Basically, we're going to calibrate these assumptions to make sure they're the best, so that when we're in the legislative session or whatever, we can just use those assumptions for those kind of decisions. So the experience study will show by the different groups, summaries of what we expected this many people to turn over by service, with the different service bands, by the different groups, how many did we actually get? And then any recommendations that we have about whether we want to change any of that, or do we think that they're close enough, or there was some reason that we can't. So for example, one thing that's going to come out of it is that the COVID years are really outliers in lots of ways. And so we don't want to change our forward-looking forecast too much based on something that happened in the middle of the pandemic, right? And so there's going to be there's an art to it beyond just science, as I'm sure you're aware. But yeah, you'll see for all the different assumptions, all the data from the last at least 6 years. For a lot of the assumptions, we actually use 10 to 12 years of look back, and then even longer than that, some of the economic assumptions. I'm just looking for longer term macro level trends, because again, we're not trying to say over the next 3 years this is going to occur. It's kind of over a 10 to 15 year period. Like, what should we expect on average? But you'll see the mortality for the different groups, turnover, salaries, disabilities, retirement patterns, all this stuff.
Would you be okay to look into the fund managed pay that's structure too?
What's that?
The fund.
We will look at what the administration costs have been and give some recommendation of what we should assume those are going forward, whether they've changed. Now, investment, if you're asking for investment management fees,
Yeah.
is really not part of the experience study. Generally, that's done more of an audit of investment portion itself. But
Could you look into it? Or I'm just very
Yes,
interested to look into, because as a whole, it's a
Yeah.
big fund and also the management fee, I think it's a significant. A big portion of it.
Right.
I'm just interested myself. I think other board member may be interested, so I would
What's the question?
respectfully
I don't
request.
get the question. What was the question?
I was asking him if in his experience study, and could he include the management fee for the fund?
Oh, for the
I'll
fund.
get an analysis of it or looking at it.
I'll talk to the investment team, but
Yeah.
I don't think it.
I don't want to
really
say no, I'm
impacts.
just not sure that that's what we can do
Yeah,
necessarily.
yeah.
But,
There's a, maybe one answer is, some, the ex officio of the SIC, they're going through a annual process of looking at their assets and liabilities, which will lead into of
And the way we calculate
array
it
of
based on,
fund. And we
yeah,
can share information from that board here, or you'd be welcome to attend those public meetings as well, to make sure you get that information.
yeah, and as it's mentioned, we calculate based on net of fees, so. We can get you that information. So,
No, I think, thank you, I appreciate it. I'll be very interested to find that out. And how would your experience with the study, would you send a report back to the treasurer or director or the share with the board?
Oh,
Well,
the
when
board,
would we
absolutely.
would see that?
Generally, the board will get, the draft. At least a week, but hopefully a little longer than that before, say, right now, I think we're targeting the May. To present the preliminary findings, and so you'd have a full draft report before that. So then we can talk about it, in kind of preliminary meeting, show a summary, high level summary of the results and what our recommendations are. And that's when really the board could give a lot of feedback about if there's something else they want to see, or if they're okay with what we're recommending. And then, sometimes the board goes ahead and adopts them immediately, or if they want to see more information, it might be a future meeting. So we just need them adopted before the next, before we do this process again next year. So, but yeah, you'll see the full report as a board. Draft report.
Thank you very much.
Before I turn it over to Gene Rondo, I just want to say thank you, Joe and Paul. I think referring to your analogy of flying the plane, I think that this gives us a lot of clarity every year. And I also want to acknowledge the board's discipline of, listening and following your recommendations. And I look forward to the experience study next year. Like you say, as you mentioned, it calibrates what's been going on in the last 2 years, so that we continue to put out more accurate information. So thank you again. Gene, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Fred. The Administration Audit Risk and Compliance Committee met on Wednesday, December 10th to consider the valuations of June 30th, 2025, presented by Gabriel Roeder and Smith and Company. Mrs. Paul Wood and Joe Newton of GRS provided a presentation to the committee discussing the employee retirement fees of state and teachers, municipal employees, state police retirement fund trust, judges, judicial retirement fund trust, and the teacher survivors benefit plan valuations as of June 30th, 2025. After discussion and consideration by the committee, it voted to recommend to the full board acceptance and approval of the valuations as of June 30th, 2025 as presented. Accordingly, I would like to make a motion to accept the recommendation of the Administration Audit Risk and Compliance Committee to approve the valuations for the period ending June 30th, 2025 for state police, judges, municipal employees, state teachers, state police retirement fund trust, judicial retirement fund trust, and teachers survivors benefit plan as presented by GRS.
I'll second Gene's motion.
Can you repeat the motion?
Any comments? Questions? All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, so moved. Thank you, Gene, Joe and Paul. Thank you, Gene. All right, I will now seek the approval of the November 2025 pensions as presented by ERSRI. So moved. Second. All in favor? Any nays? So moved. I will now turn it over to the Disability Committee. Doctor, please.
Great. Legal counsel looks like they're ahead of me on the agenda.
I can go. Yeah. You want me to go, Treasurer?
Uh,
Yeah, legal.
Legal.
so I think we,
you moved it.
In the border says legal.
okay.
Okay.
Maybe.
You better come up with something, Counselor.
Hey, get rid of it. Yeah, the reports are included in the packet.
Oh, I see.
No real substantive updates. The Patricia Dubois matter, which I did report on last month, which is we received a favorable decision from the Superior Court. The petitioner did file for a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court. We're following our opposition to that today, so that may or may not be taken up by the Supreme Court, depending on whether they grant her a writ or not.
Any questions for legal? Seeing none, all right, we'll move from one doctor to the other.
All right, so I guess first I'll make a motion to approve the Disability Committee recommendations from our December 5th, 2025 meeting.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? So moved.
And then we're going to discuss the recommendation from our September meeting on applicant Ansley.
So I was just, the way the decision reads, I wasn't clear on why the denial happened. If you could just clarify that for me, I would appreciate it.
You know, we kind of weigh both the, obviously the IME's reports and then dig deeper into primary care doctor and the primary treating physician's reports, but also look at the way that the legislation is worded, right? So if you look at the Rhode Island General Law 45-19-16.1, it's worded as who is unable to perform the duties required thereof because of an impairment of health caused by heart disease, stroke, or hypertension. And so I think where we struggled with this case was that he was already not able to do his job, right? He was already out of work. He'd had cancer, had moved to Florida. And so we couldn't say because of this new cardiac conduction disease and needing a pacemaker that he couldn't do his job. He already was out of work. It's our interpretation of the way the intent of that Rhode Island general law was, you know, that if you're disabled because of a cardiac condition, then you should receive the disability, accidental disability. We couldn't make that leap. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. However, I think all three of the state doctors said he is disabled, correct?
Yes, and we didn't disagree that he was disabled.
Right. So that being said, the burden of proof is on the state at this point to prove that it wasn't job related to overcome the presumption, correct? Am I correct in
No,
assuming that
we're
how the
saying-
statute is written?
No, they're saying the presumption doesn't apply
Yep.
because his inability to work was not caused by the installation of the pacemaker. I also believe that there was evidence in the record that the installation of the pacemaker was successful and that he had, gone back to some level of physical activity.
So, yeah, some level of physical activity, but is it your position that a 65-year-old firefighter with a pacemaker should be going into a burning building? That's the question I presented in October.
Yeah, I wasn't here at that meeting, but that's not what our decision was based on. It was that we couldn't make the connection between him being out of work, unable to work, which we did agree he was disabled, and the fact that he had the conduction disease and had a pacemaker put in because he was already unable to work because of all of his other medical.
So you're saying that the heart problem was not the reason for his disability?
Correct. It may have played into it, but it wasn't. We couldn't tell
But
because he
you
always.
can't definitively say one way or the other. Is that a fair statement to make?
I think so.
I think it's based upon his years being out of service.
Yeah.
He had been in Florida for several years prior to the installation of the pacemaker, and the committee had considered that and weighed that heavily.
Well, I don't think the committee has a right to include where the person resides or travels to in their medical findings
Yeah.
to base a disability.
That was just evidence that he had been out of work for a number of years, had been disabled for a number of years, whether he lived in Rhode Island or Florida, really was irrelevant.
But I mean, he said he's been out of work since 2020, so why is it relevant where he travel to or
It's not,
physically
it's
was.
just an example of that he was not working since that time, unable to work since that time, was already disabled and unable to work prior to that new cardiac condition that arose.
And excuse me, doctor, didn't we note that he had, applied for cancer and it was denied and he never appealed back in what, 2023?
Yeah, I don't think we delved into it, but he does have a history of diagnosis of cancer previously and
Right.
had been treated.
And that not qualifying condition and cardiac palpitations.
Right.
That's what I.
Thank you.
So I guess I'll make a motion to approve the previous recommendation to deny accidental, I guess, not exactly, whatever our previous recommendation was. I'll make a motion to that.
It's a motion,
I'll second.
second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays?
Nay.
One nay. Great, so moved. Thank you very much. There's no other new business or old business. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. So move.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you everyone for your
Happy
work.
holidays.
Yeah, that's right. So, it was well.